So in this video, we are going to be talking about tattoo cover. So I don't have a tattoo of my own, so we are going to be using a temporary tattoo for this. So your very first step, if you're going to be doing any kind of tattoo cover on someone, would be to clean that area of their skin. So because this is a temporary tattoo, I'm not going to take alcohol or witch hazel to this because it would actually remove it. But if this is just somebody's arm that I'm working on, then I would always wipe it down with either like a little like alcohol towelette or just like a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of witch hazel. You don't want to like damage somebody's skin or like over dry it, but you definitely want to make sure that there are no extra oils or anything on it. Um, if there is any oil, that could cause it to oxidize. So if it oxidizes, that means that the makeup is going to react with the oils in somebody's skin and it could change the color of it. So you want to make sure that you avoid that. So what I'm going to show you all today is just a couple different options as far as color correcting your temporary tattoos or your regular tattoos go. Um, so as far as color correcting goes, that just means that we are trying to neutralize colors on the skin that we don't necessarily want to be there. So a lot of times with tattoo cover, you have to cover tattoos for shows. Sometimes it just doesn't fit what somebody's vision or like aesthetic is for a show, but other times it actually has to do more with the fact that they may not have like the license to use somebody else's art. So if they do not have like a legal agreement that they're allowed to use like your specific tattoo artist's art, then that could be why they're making you cover your tattoo. So it is not always just because they don't necessarily like tattoos or whatever. Sometimes it is just because they're not technically allowed to use it. I think a lot of people wonder if like they are going to be actors or actresses, like should I get a tattoo? Is it bad to get tattoos? I don't necessarily think that it's bad. I think that you should be able to do whatever you want. You just have to understand that there are going to be times when you are going to have to cover it. So you need to understand how to do that. There's not always going to be like a wig and makeup person on a show or a makeup artist at a film that you're doing that's going to be able to cover it for you. So it's a really good thing if you can invest in those products and invest in the knowledge for yourself, just so that way you know that you can always cover it if you have to. So with this specific tattoo that we're going to be covering, we have a couple different colors going on. So there's a lighter purple, there's like a really deep like blue purple, and then there's also a green. So you could sit there and color correct each individual color. Um, and again, to color correct, we're going to be using our color wheel and we're going to use the complementary colors or the colors that are across from each other on the color wheel to cancel each other out or neutralize. And then we can layer skin tone on top of it. So I'm going to show you three different ways that you could color correct it. We're going to do one that's a little bit closer to my skin tone. We're going to do one that's a little bit redder, and then we're going to do one that's kind of like the classic orange that everybody likes to use for tattoo cover. Um, I personally don't think tattoo cover is like a one size fits all kind of a situation. I think that every single person I've ever done it on, it has been a different color combination. So I can't really tell you that there is like one right way to do it. But if you really kind of pay attention to like what um, kind of just like what the colors are underneath like somebody's skin, so like really like what their undertone is, it can help you kind of figure out where to start with color correctors. So the product that I'm going to use to kind of show you all this is going to be Krylon's Derma Color. So Derma Color is kind of like one of the standard products that is used a lot in tattoo cover in both like theater, film, TV, all of that. It's a cream. It is not self-setting, so we are going to have to put a powder on it. But what's nice about this little color wheel is it kind of gives you a lot of different options for skin tones. I've mixed most skin tones and tattoo covers out of this. One color that we're going to use from this is this kind of like bluish red color. So this bluish red is kind of like a blood tone. So I like to think of it as sort of like a good like underlayer for a lot of makeup. So that's why I think it works really well with a lot of tattoo cover. And what I found is if you find the color that works really well to like cancel out whatever your strongest color is. So a lot of times that is going to be like a blue black or this kind of like blue purple that we have in this. That's going to cancel out everything. So I could sit there and I could, color correct the green and the lighter purple and everything else, but I can just take this kind of red tone or like a peachy tone because that's more appropriate for my skin tone or the orange or whatever it may be, and I can kind of knock out the color in all of it. I think it's a lot better if you can do things a little bit simpler. If you're the artist doing this, then yeah, you can take your time. But if you're teaching somebody to do this for a show, they're not going to have an hour to sit there and cover their tattoo every day. So I think the simpler that you can make something, the better. So if you can just take kind of like one color corrector and go over that whole area on your arm and then color it with like the skin tone, it's just going to be a lot easier for you than if you sit there and try to color correct each individual part. Again, That's just the way that I've found personally that I think works a little bit better, but everybody is going to have their own way to do it. And it's kind of important that you find what works best for you and what makes most sense to you. But for this, we're going to use colors that would color correct the deepest, kind of like blue, black, deep purple shade in this. So thinking back to our color wheel, that's going to be something kind of in the world of like orange or even like that red. So that red is not necessarily like the perfect complementary color, but it works really well to kind of get rid of those deeper tones. So that's why it's like it's good to know and understand our color wheel, but we also have to understand how to kind of like work beyond that because it's not going to be the same rules for every person that you work on. The fairer the skin, generally kind of like the fair the color corrector needs to be. So for somebody like me in this situation, a peach is probably going to end up being a lot better for my skin tone. That red tone works on a wide variety of people I have found. And then the orange is really going to be a little bit easier to work with on medium to deep skin tones. It is possible to use all of these colors pretty much on anybody. It just kind of might take a little bit more work to get to your end product if you start with something that's a little bit too extreme for somebody's skin tone. So I'm going to start with a little bit of this red color. And so I'm going to scoop it out. This is not my personal like makeup. This is makeup for my kit. So I'm going to make sure that I spray my spatula in between with alcohol and clean it off so that way everything stays as sanitary as possible. That is really important to remember, especially if you are working on other people and it's not just on yourself. You want to keep it as clean as possible. So when we're doing this, you want to make sure that you are not like spreading the makeup over it. We want to be like dabbing the makeup onto it because if you are just like spreading it with a brush, then you're just kind of like pulling it around when we really want it to be like concentrated in one specific area. So a lot of times like what will happen when I'm doing tattoo cover is I will like put a color onto somebody's skin and it just looks completely wrong. So what I found is sometimes if I'm not sure, I will test like on the outside of it and I will make sure that that color seems like it's going to blend into somebody's skin tone before I get too deep into it. Um, so we've got this red color and then I'm also going to use this like classic orange color. So like I said, I'm going to do this in 3 different sections. I think a lot of times we see like vibrant red and vibrant orange being used for this. Again, that is not going to work for everybody. So that's why I think it's a good idea to kind of have a good understanding of like the color wheel and undertones and skin tones, just so that you can make your life a little bit easier. So I'm also going to use this peachy color. So this may end up being a little bit too intense for me. So this is something where like I've done this a million times, but every time is going to be so different that I will probably get it wrong the first time I do it too, which I think is a really important thing to kind of keep in mind is that it's just makeup. You can wipe it back off if it's not correct. So we're going to try it out and see. So I'm going to clean this off again because remember, you really don't want to like double dip into things. You want to make sure that you're not cross contaminating any of the makeup or anything. I prefer to use like smaller brushes a lot of the times when I'm doing this too, just because sometimes I feel like the larger ones I can't get as much of like a concentrated kind of an application. And then I'm also going to grab kind of like a lighter peachier color because I think like looking at that yellow one, that yellowy peach, it's just going to be too intense on me. So that's what I'm saying. Like you really have to like think of who it is that you're working on just because um, everybody's skin is going to react so differently. So you really want to like make sure that you're customizing whatever the tattoo cover or whatever you could be covering bruises, whatever it is that you're doing to the person that you are working on. So again, I really prefer to use like smaller brushes. Maybe it takes me a little bit longer, but I think this way it's a little bit easier because you can kind of like concentrate it to the shape of whatever the tattoo is. I recommend though that you would want to do like this kind of like entire section of your arm just because it's going to look a little bit odd if you just have this one little part that's outlined a little bit. You know, it is makeup. Makeup can only do so much, so it's going to look um, a little bit different, maybe like a little bit off from what we are used to seeing when we look at skin. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with this really bright orange. So you can see when I put it on again, that is super bright, right? So you can kind of already see where something like that would definitely be a problem on somebody who is as pale as me. But we're going to go ahead and you really want to try to get it just on the inside of the shape or like with the words, whatever it is, just because if too much of this orange or any of your color correctors gets onto your skin, it's just going to turn you that color. And you only need a little bit, especially if you're working with a product like Derma Color. It's super concentrated and super pigmented, so you don't really have to worry about really caking it on. Um, so like I said, if you were gonna do the whole thing with the orange, I would probably like, yes, I would be careful to try to outline it, but realistically, you're probably gonna have like a little like rectangle in this part of your arm that would be just that color. So we're gonna go ahead and do the red next. So I'm just gonna kind of go like down in intensity, I guess. And again, you're gonna use that same method where you're just kind of like pressing it into the skin and you're not doing like large like strokes to wipe it on. So you can already see like that kind of like red tone. I feel like that already kind of gives you um a little bit more of like a just like a recognizable skin color. Like I feel like you can look at that and you're like, okay, like that looks a little bit more like what I would see on somebody's skin as opposed to the orange, which on somebody like me is very, very jarring because I am so pale. But again, if I was more of like a medium to a deep skin tone, it would probably work a little bit better. So that's the thing. It's just like what is going to work for me in this specific tutorial. You're going to have to twist that for somebody that has a different skin tone and different undertone for me. So that's why I think it is really important not to just feel like, okay, I learned how to do tattoo cover. I see a lot of people that are like, I need orange and then that I'm perfect. That's really not how it's going to go. And you'll really see that now when I use this kind of like peachier color. So I really love to use color correctors that are like as close to somebody's skin tone as I can get it, but that still have enough of that like color in it. So this peachy color has enough of that orange in it where it's going to knock out these really deep shades of like bluish purple, but it's going to be so much closer to my skin tone. And sometimes, especially like in theater, like the world that we work in, there is not time to sit there and do a million steps. So if you can get something that is close enough to where it's going to get rid of the tattoo at a distance, sometimes that's all you have time for. So a color like this would probably be a lot better for that kind of a situation because you can see that if I was really far away from somebody on a stage, that would probably just disappear into my skin. So that's something to really take into consideration. If you don't have that perfect like color corrector that looks a little bit more like skin tone, you can always mix your foundation with a more extreme color corrector, and then you can kind of customize it from there. Um, so sometimes I will use like an oil to help break these down. I use Makeup Blend a lot by Krylon, but right now I'm just kind of like pressing it into the skin. Um, I usually just use brushes if I'm working on other people, but sometimes it can be helpful if you kind of also use your fingers to help you blend out your edges. Um, it's not the greatest to use your hands on somebody else. If you're going to do that, make sure you're as sanitary as possible, but it is really important to try to blend out your edges. But you can kind of see if we're comparing like all three of these colors, it's very obvious which one blends in better to me. So that's why I think using color correctors is great. It is so important, but I also think that we just have to recognize the importance of like if you can just take that extra step of just like mixing one that's a little bit closer to your skin tone, you're just going to make your life a lot easier because eventually I could cover that orange. I could cover that red, but it's going to take me a lot longer than it's going to take me to cover up this like peachy shade. Um, so again, you want to just keep trying to like blend your edges out because if I don't blend them out, it's going to get a little bit like blobby and weird. So the goal is you really want it to kind of like melt into the skin a little bit. Um, so for the like red and the orange colors, I would probably want to set that with like some kind of a powder before I put a skin tone over it. I don't always set in between colors. Some people do. I think sometimes it makes it oxidize more. That could just be my own personal makeup issues, I suppose, or things that I've had problems with in the past, or it could just be the products that I'm using. But sometimes I don't do that. Another thing that you want to do if you are going to start layering other colors or you're going to set it with powder is to go through and kind of blend it. So again, like I said, sometimes using your finger, as long as your hands are sanitized, that heat from your finger really helps these like thicker concealers, which often that is what you're going to be using for tattoo cover. It kind of helps it blend into the skin a little bit more. So I'm just going through and I'm just kind of like patting it into my skin, and that's going to help kind of like melt it into my skin. Again, I'm probably not going to put powder over this before I put skin tone over it. We'll try the other two and see how far we get with that, but a lot of times the color corrector just mixes with the foundation color and then it turns you like a crazy color. So it's a good idea to kind of like blend it in as much as possible. If it's going to be a really bright color, maybe throw some powder over it. But otherwise, you would be at the point where we can start adding skin tone over this.